So we know light gun cabinets are coming from Arcade1up at some point. We know these are currently in development. Today, I'm going to look at predictions for which titles we can expect, and I'm going to be looking at three things. Number one, licensing. Does Arcade1up already have licensing in place with this company? Of course, they can add new licenses, but at this point, they have so many relationships with so many companies that already have great light gun games that I think that's a safe assumption that that's where they're going to start, are companies they've already worked with. Bundling. We know from previous discussions and interviews with Arcade1up that identifying multiple games to fit a themed cabinet from a given licensor is critical to them releasing a title. Just last week on Retro Buzz, when asked about a Marble Madness cabinet, John D from Arcade1up cited a lack of other trackball games from Atari, the company behind Marble Madness, to bundle together. So we're going to prioritize games that have other similar releases that could be bundled together for one blockbuster cabinet. And popularity, name recognition is critical for Arcade1up because they have to be able to sell this title to retailers to be picked up. And if the retail buyers do not recognize the game, it's going to be a lot harder for that to happen. So I'm guessing very strongly that we're just going to see blockbuster cabinets initially, and then maybe down the road in later years we'll see more obscure games get launched. That tends to be the pattern with Arcade1up. But I also want to hear from you. Which light gun games do you want in your house? Let me know in the comments, because it's not all about the easiest cabinets to release. It's also about the community and the feedback you guys give Arcade1up. They've talked about that a lot before. And in fact, that Final Fight, even though we probably all think of that as a common game, the buyers at retail hadn't heard of it and they didn't pick it up. And that's why it wasn't part of the Wave 1 release from Arcade1up. But once the community spoke out and demanded it, retailers listened, they bought it from Arcade1up. Rest is history. So keep that in mind and let me know in the comments what's up. Now, these guys have said in an interview that they are working on light gun games, and for that matter, racing games. Just generally titles with unique control schemes that deserve their own cabinet. The only question is, which games are we going to get? I'm going to break these down into two categories. In part one of this video, I'm going to cover light gun games that are old school. I'm talking no 3D polygon graphics. We're talking sprite-based games like Atari's Area 51. And then in part two of this video, I'll cover light gun games with 3D polygon graphics like a Time Crisis. Why? Well, Arcade1up made it clear that holiday 2021 is the earliest they can affordably emulate the more demanding 3D games like Time Crisis. But I believe they will release a light gun game fall 2020. They've hinted as much. They've talked about wanting new form factors, new formats, unique controls. I don't think they're going to wait till 2021 to give us one of these cabinets. But if that's the case, that leaves us only with two-dimensional shooters and shooters with pre-rendered 3D backgrounds like Lethal Enforcers for this year, 2020. So let's look at the games that I think we're going to get this fall.
Hi, you're new around these parts. You heading into my daddy's town? He's the mayor. Well, if you are, you better take up some target practice first.
I already mentioned it, so let's get this one out of the way. Area 51. This is a no-brainer for an initial release from Arcade1up. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. Number one, it's from Atari. Of all the companies Arcade1up has worked with to license their games, you could argue that the strongest relationship is with Atari. They've done multiple cabinets with these guys, and there's even a press release behind an exclusive relationship of 3/4 cabinets that Atari will only authorize Arcade1up to release. To my knowledge, no other licensors have done a similarly exclusive relationship with Arcade1up. This is a simple game to emulate. The backgrounds are all pre-rendered, so they're basically just video, and the moving elements like the characters and NPCs are just 2D sprites. No different than many other titles Arcade1up has already emulated, like a Mortal Kombat. Area 51 is already one of the most well-known shooting arcade games there is. I used to play this on PC even, and in the arcade. I just couldn't get enough of this as a kid. I think that's true for a lot of you as well. And what's more, there are very obvious games to bundle into a single cabinet. Of course, Area 51, and then Maximum Force, the spin-off, and Area 51 Site 4, the direct sequel to the original Area 51. Now, I'm certain Area 51 and Maximum Force were made with the exact same game engine. I'm not certain about the Area 51 sequel, but they look similar in gameplay videos. So I'm thinking whatever hardware they create for Area 51 is going to be fine for these other two games, and obviously licensing will already be in place. I fully expect this to be one of the initial releases we get from Arcade1up. Next is arguably the most recognizable of its era of light gun games, Lethal Enforcers. Again, with the pre-rendered backgrounds and live speech, this thing looked really cutting edge at its time and dominated arcades in the 90s. Now, I've not played this since the 90s, but the consensus seems to be this game did not age well. Even when it was re-released in the late 90s for home consoles, it was panned as kind of a basic game. The gameplay is just very simple and repetitive, and there's just not a lot to it. But again, it's iconic. Everybody recognizes it. And I think a lot of us buy some of these Arcade1ups not because we plan to play it a ton, but because we're going to play it some and because it looks really cool and it's just a piece of arcade history. Lethal Enforcers absolutely falls into that category. This is a Konami title. Arcade1up has previously worked with Konami on the release of TMNT. Now, you might note that Nickelodeon owns the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles license itself, but Arcade1up still had to work with Konami to license the game, so there is that licensor relationship. For emulation, I can't think of a simpler 90s shooter game to emulate than this game. Pre-rendered backgrounds, 2D sprites, simple stuff. The name recognition is clearly there to satisfy the Walmarts of the world when they pick up titles to distribute. And lastly, there's a very obvious series of games to bundle. In addition to Lethal Enforcers, they should give us Lethal Enforcers 2, and I think they can stop there, honestly. I don't think they're going to need to throw in more games than that. Now, there was a Lethal Enforcers 3 and even a Japanese themed spin-off in Police 911, and then even that game had its own sequels and spin-off.
Members of the gang have begun to make their getaway by car.
But those games all use 3D graphics, so they wouldn't be included here. But give us Lethal Enforcers 1 and 2, and I think you've got a hit on your hands. Next is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Arcade1up needs to throw some red meat to the enthusiast fans in this initial lineup and give us a good old school hardcore arcade game that we're going to want to come back to and play over and over again, and I think that's the T2 cabinet. Plus, it looks super awesome. Now, sure, the last Terminator movie was trash, but so was the last Star Wars movie, and that made the old school Star Wars arcade that Arcade1up did all the better because it reminds us of a simpler time. T2 is a midway cabinet, and although I'm not aware of any modern re-release of this game, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I have no reason to think this game is in copyright hell. The game itself is simple enough with those raster graphics, just like Star Wars Return of the Jedi. The light guns themselves are pretty large and kind of detailed, but they're plastic, so I assume this wouldn't be cost prohibitive to produce. And everyone and their grandmother has heard of Terminator 2 the game, let alone Terminator 2 the movie, one of the most famous action movies of all time. Walmart would give up 6 months of corporate welfare to be able to sell this thing, make no mistake. I'm not aware of any other high-profile 2D midway light gun games. There is a really old midway game called Desert Gun that I think is vector-based. It looks like junk, and I don't think anyone would want to play that. That's the only other game I could come up with in my research that they might bundle with T2. Again, if you know of something I'm missing, let me know in the comments. My take on this, and I think you'd probably agree, we don't really need more games with Terminator 2. Just give us Terminator 2 Arcade, we're good to go. I think Arcade1up sometimes overestimates our need for multiple titles. I think people would have bought Burger Time if it was just Burger Time and had a perfect control panel, and I think that's true for Terminator 2. Honorable mention for a game that I want to see but I don't really expect, and that's Mad Dog McCree. The company behind this is called American Laser Games. They're not a big brand name and they haven't released a new game in eons, but they did license Mad Dog McCree for Wii re-release, so anything is possible. I wish I could list more games here, but those are really the only 2D light gun games with enough name recognition that I think they're going to be included in an initial light gun cab lineup. When launching a new category like they're doing with light gun cabs, Arcade1up is going to want to go big initially with big titles to make sure the category is a success, just like we are seeing them do with pinball. Attack from Mars is one of the most popular pinball machines ever, and Star Wars is Star Wars. Even in 2020, when maybe people are a little sick of it, it's still Star Wars. It's a huge brand, and they're making sure that those pinball tables they release are a hit. They're going to do the same thing with the shooter cabinets. As much as I'd love to see a chiller cab, I just don't think we're going to see hardcore stuff like that anytime soon. Now, in my next video, I'll cover the second generation of light gun cabinets we can expect from Arcade1up, which puts us out in holiday 2021. Let me know your picks below in the comments, which cabinets you want to see, whether they're the older style or the more modern 3D shooters. And hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to be part of the channel and be posted on new videos. Make sure you enable all notifications so you know when we release a new video. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you real soon.